the epicenter of the pandemic in New York City, this is Democracy Now!
He was killed, and he was killed in the street after he was chased down and cut off by two vehicles. And nobody went to jail.
Right.
Nobody went to jail behind it. You know, they were able to go home, and my baby was placed in a body bag. You know, that's not fair.
Today would have been Ahmaud Arbery's 26th birthday. But he was killed in February when a white retired police officer and his son shot him as he went out for a jog. Yesterday, they were charged with murder. What about their friend, the man who filmed them? We'll speak with civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who's representing the Arbery family. Then we go to Louisiana to look at the deadly, disparate impact of the pandemic on African Americans.
Slightly more than 70% of all the deaths in Louisiana are of African Americans. And so that deserves more attention, and we're going to have to dig into that and see what we can do.
We'll speak with New York Times writer Linda Villarosa about her new piece, A Terrible Price, the deadly racial disparities of COVID-19 in America. It tells what happened to the Zulu Club, a black social organization in New Orleans during and after Mardi Gras. Usually the experience is a joy. The coronavirus made it a tragedy. And as more than 40 states begin to reopen and President Trump gets tested every day, he downplays tests' importance for the rest of the country. We'll speak with emergency physician Dr. Lena Wen. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The U.S. death toll from the coronavirus outbreak has topped 75,000, is projected to keep rising at a rate as high as 3,000 deaths a day in the coming weeks. But President Trump is continuing to push for states to reopen businesses despite the public health risk. The Trump administration's rejected detailed recommendations by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on how schools, churches, and businesses could safely reopen. This marks the latest attempt by the White House to sideline the CDC, which has not held a regular news briefing on the pandemic in 2 months. President Trump's also reducing the public role of two key medical advisors, Drs. Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx, who had been taking part in daily televised briefings about the crisis. Meanwhile, one of President Trump's personal valets has tested positive for COVID-19. NBC News reports Trump became, quote, lava-level mad at his staff over the incident, accusing them of failing to protect him from the virus. Trump confirmed the valet's positive test during an Oval Office meeting Thursday with Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
I just had a test, as you probably heard. In fact, I had one yesterday and I had one today, and it's negative. Mike just had a test and it's negative. But they do the tests, and it just shows you that the fallacy, it's what I've been saying. Testing is not a perfect art.
Trump said he and Vice President Pence will now be tested for coronavirus once a day. That's not an option for the vast majority of Americans. Over the past week, the United States has carried out, on average, less than 250,000 diagnostic tests for coronavirus per day. That's far short of the 900,000 tests a day recommended by Harvard's Global Health Institute as the minimum level needed to safely begin reopening parts of the United States. The Harvard plan calls for the U.S. to ramp up to 20 million tests per day by midsummer. National Nurses United says the number of nurses who've died of COVID-19 has soared over the last 2 weeks. On Thursday, members of the union placed 88 pairs of white shoes in Lafayette Park across from the White House, one pair for every U.S. nurse known to have died of the disease. The nurses stood 6 feet apart as they read the names of the dead, protesting what the union called Trump's abhorrent failure to protect nurses. This week marks National Nurses Week. Economists are describing the job crisis in the United States as the worst since the Great Depression. 3.2 million people filed for unemployment last week, bringing the total to 33 million since the pandemic began. Many other workers have suffered reduced pay or hours. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics is releasing its April jobs figures today, and economists predict it'll be a devastating report. As millions of Americans struggle to pay for food, Republican lawmakers are refusing to back an expansion of the federal food stamps program. Meanwhile, the Washington Post reports the Small Business Administration has quietly slashed the size of emergency disaster loans it's issuing to just $150,000. The limit had been $2 million. On Capitol Hill, Democratic leaders are preparing to unveil a massive new coronavirus relief package, which Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer promised will be Rooseveltian in scope, a reference to the New Deal legislation of the Great Depression. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Thursday the bill will likely include $800 billion in funding for state and local governments, money for COVID-19 tests and food stamp funding, money for unemployed workers, and other direct payments to needy families. Meanwhile, Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell brought senators back from an extended 6-week recess this week, but did not schedule any coronavirus-related measures. McConnell's first order of business was confirmation hearing for 37-year-old Justin Walker, President Trump's nominee for a lifetime appointment to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. If confirmed, Walker will replace 65-year-old Judge Thomas B. Griffith, who announced in March he's planning to retire in September. The progressive advocacy group Demand Justice is asking federal courts to investigate whether Senator McConnell pressured Judge Griffith to retire to clear the way for Walker, who's a protege of McConnell. At Walker's Senate confirmation hearing Wednesday, Illinois Democrat Dick Durbin said he'd rather be addressing the coronavirus pandemic.
It is the gravest challenge and crisis that we have faced, many of us, in our lifetime. And so I thought if the Senate Judiciary Committee is coming back for business, there's certainly a lot of things we can bring up. The list is lengthy, and unfortunately, it isn't the reason we're returning this week. Instead, we're considering the nomination of a 37-year-old family friend of Senator McConnell's to the second highest court in the land.
Here in New York, new data from the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office show that 35 of 40 people arrested for social distancing violations were black. Mayor Bill de Blasio has rejected comparisons to New York City's unconstitutional stop and frisk policies under former Mayor Bloomberg, but said in tweet, quote, "The disparity in the numbers does not reflect our values." This comes as a new study by the Foundation for AIDS Research finds U.S. counties with a predominantly black population account for over half of the coronavirus cases in the country and nearly 60% of COVID-19 deaths. In Texas, Republican Governor Greg Abbott has removed jail as a form of punishment for people who violate coronavirus restrictions. This comes after the Texas Supreme Court ordered the release of a salon owner in Dallas who was arrested for reopening her business violating Texas lockdown rules. In Nebraska, local health officials have been banned from reporting on COVID-19 data from meat processing plants. Republican Governor Pete Ricketts said Wednesday the state will no longer release the numbers, arguing it's a matter of worker privacy. Meat processing plants are home to some of the largest coronavirus hotspots in the country, with thousands of confirmed cases and at least 20 deaths tied to meat plants. In Georgia, the two white men who were caught on camera shooting and killing Ahmaud Arbery, an unarmed 25-year-old African-American man, in February, were arrested and charged Thursday with murder. The arrest came 2 days after the video was shared with the public, sparking widespread outrage. Gregory McMichael and his son Travis were both charged with murder and aggravated assault and booked in Glenn County, Georgia, where the killing took place more than 2 months ago. The video was filmed by a third white man, William Bryan, who is Travis's neighbor. Bryan has reportedly also been charged but has not yet been arrested. Today would have been Ahmaud Arbery's 26th birthday. After headlines, we'll speak with Arbery family attorney Benjamin Crump. The Justice Department has dropped charges against President Trump's disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, even though Flynn twice pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his communications with the Russian ambassador to the United States. Attorney General Bill Barr called the move an easy decision. He spoke with CBS reporter Catherine Herridge.
When history looks back on this decision, how do you think it will be written?
Well, history is written by the winner, so it largely depends on who's writing the history.
California Congressmember Adam Schiff, the Democratic chair of the House Intelligence Committee, tweeted, Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his illicit Russian contacts. His lies do not now become truths. This dismissal does not exonerate him, but it does incriminate Bill Barr in the worst politicization of the Justice Department in his history, Schiff said. The Supreme Court has overturned the convictions of two senior aides to New Jersey's former Republican Governor Chris Christie over the infamous Bridgegate scandal. In 2016, Bridget Ann Kelly and Bill Baroni were convicted of conspiring to create a traffic jam to punish the mayor of Fort Lee for declining to endorse Christie's gubernatorial re-election bid. Christie denied involvement in the plot. On Thursday, Supreme Court justices ruled unanimously that although Christie's aides engaged in deception, corruption, and abuse of power, they did not violate federal wire fraud statutes. Chris Christie is a close ally of President Trump. He made headlines this week when he urged Americans to return to their jobs despite the raging coronavirus pandemic, saying, quote, there are going to be deaths no matter what. He was speaking to CNN's Dana Bash.
We sent our young men during World War II over to Europe, out to the Pacific, knowing that many of them would not come home alive. And we decided to make that sacrifice because what we were standing up for was the American way of life. In the very same way now, we have to stand up for the American way of life.
The British government reports black residents of England and Wales are more than 4 times as likely to die of COVID-19 than white residents, while people of South Asian descent are up to 80% more likely to die of the disease. The findings mirror racial disparities of COVID-19 deaths in the United States. The United Kingdom now has the largest number of confirmed coronavirus deaths in Europe at over 30,000. Meanwhile, European leaders, including Britain's Boris Johnson, France's Emmanuel Macron, and Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel, are marking VE Day today with low-key ceremonies on the 75th anniversary of the surrender of Nazi Germany in 1945. In Belarus, which suffered heavily under Nazi occupation, authorities are planning to hold a massive military parade in the capital Minsk, despite a surge in coronavirus cases. Belarus's longtime authoritarian leader, Alexander Lukashenko, has refused to impose any major restrictions on public gatherings, and medical experts believe a surge in COVID-19 deaths in Belarus is largely going unreported. Back in the United States, Tara Reade has called on Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden to drop out of the race. Reade's accused Biden of sexually assaulting her 27 years ago while she worked as his aide in his Senate office. Biden's denied the allegations. Reade made the comment in an interview with Megyn Kelly.
I want to say, you and I were there, Joe Biden. Please step forward and be held accountable. You should not be running on character for the President of the United States.
You want him to withdraw?
I wish he would, but he won't, but I wish he would. That's how I feel emotionally.
Meanwhile, a newspaper in California has obtained a 1996 court filing that shows Tara Reade told her ex-husband that she was sexually harassed while working at Senator Biden's office. In the document, Reade's ex-husband, Theodore Dronin, writes, quote, it was obvious that this event had a very traumatic effect on Reade and that she is still sensitive and affected by it today. The document is the first written record to substantiate part of Tara Reade's claim. And a 56-foot billboard called the Trump Death Clock has been unveiled in Times Square here in New York. The billboard was created by the Oscar-nominated filmmaker Eugene Jarecki.
So the Trump death clock is a billboard that hangs over Times Square, and what it shows is an estimate of the number of U.S. COVID-19 deaths that resulted from the president and his team's failed response to the coronavirus outbreak. Thanks to Dr. Fauci and leading epidemiologists, we now know that had the mitigation guidelines been put into effect just 1 week earlier, on March 9th instead of March 16th, 60% of U.S. COVID-19 deaths would have been prevented. That's an incredible number, and on behalf of all those who needlessly lost their lives to this failed leadership in a pandemic, we need a symbol that cries out not only for accountability, but also for more responsible and responsive stewardship going forward.
At the time of this broadcast, the Trump death clock stands at 46,485 and growing. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The two white men who were caught on film shooting and killing Ahmaud Arbery, an unarmed 25-year-old African-American man, in February, were arrested and charged with murder 2 days after the video was shared with the public, sparking widespread outrage. Retired police officer Gregory McMichael and his son Travis were both charged with murder and aggravated assault and booked in Glenn County, Georgia, where the killing took place more than 2 months ago. Their arrests followed days of protest over the details of the case and the fact that the two men walked free 4 months after slaying Arbery. The disturbing video that emerged Tuesday shows Ahmaud Arbery jogging down a narrow road in Brunswick, Georgia, in broad daylight when he's confronted by the two armed men. As Arbery jogs, Travis McMichael can be seen waiting for him in the road with a shotgun while his father stands in the back of a pickup truck with a revolver. After a brief confrontation, Arbery is shot at 3 times. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation said in a news briefing, Travis McMichael is the one who shot and killed Ahmaud Arbery. The video was filmed by a third white man, William Bryan. Journalist Sean King said on Twitter Friday, Bryan's also being charged but has not yet been arrested. The Brunswick police reportedly had a copy of the shocking video since February, but before Thursday, no charges had been filed against the McMichaels, who claimed they chased Arbery because he looked like a burglary suspect. Gregory McMichael is a former officer with the Glenn County Police Department who also worked as an investigator in the district attorney's office there. This is Ahmaud Arbery's mother, Wanda Cooper, in an exclusive interview last week with activist and journalist Sean King for his new podcast, The Breakdown.
He was killed, and he was killed in the street after he was chased down and cut off by 2 vehicles. And nobody went to jail.
Right.
Nobody went to jail behind it. You know, they were able to go home, and my baby was placed in a body bag. You know, that's not fair.
Today would have been Ahmaud Arbery's 26th birthday. The local NAACP chapter will protest outside the Brunswick courthouse in Georgia today under the hashtag #RunWithMaud. People are pledging to run 2.23 miles today to mark the day Ahmaud Arbery was killed, February 23rd, and send pictures. We're joined now by Benjamin Crump, civil rights attorney representing the family of Ahmaud Arbery. He's the author of Open Season, Legalized Genocide of Colored People. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Ben Crump. Can you explain what exactly happened? We are seeing this video for the first time this week, but Ahmaud was murdered on February 23rd. What happened?
Well, Amy, it is clear from the video that this murderous duo, this father and son, the McMichaels, profiled Ahmaud Arbery, we believe, because the basis of his race. They claim that, like with Trayvon Martin, that he was burglarizing a home or he had committed a burglary, yet there's no burglary mask, there's no burglary tools, there's no burglary bag. I mean, he has a T-shirt and shorts on, but yet they claim that's the reason they stopped him. And when you look at the video, it harkens back to yesteryears. things we thought we had overcome in America. I mean, it looks like it's a lynch mob chasing a young black man, and when they kill him, there is no accountability. They go home and sleep in their beds at night, and it takes 74 days before there's an arrest. And the arrest was not because the police or the law enforcement individuals saw the video, because they had it on day one in February. It's because we saw the video, Amy. That's why we got an arrest finally after all these days, even though these men chased him with a shotgun and a .357 Magnum, and they executed Ahmaud Arbery in broad daylight.
I mean, this is just an astounding story. Maud, as he was known, his nickname, was a well-known jogger in the community, ran almost every day. And can you then explain, this was a Sunday afternoon in broad daylight, and then take us on that journey as you understand it at this point. Not only are we following Maud jogging in the middle of the road, coming upon this pickup truck with the retired white police officer in the back. You wouldn't know he's a police officer, of course, and his son holding the shotgun next to it. But the question of the man who is following Arbery filming this.
Yes, William Bryan, who we believe is an accomplice to this murder, he should be charged with aiding and abetting the McMichaels in their execution of Ahmaud Arbery. And it's just unbelievable, Amy, that they would want to film this. And, you know, it shocks the conscience. You just can't believe it, but it's real in 2020. We're not talking about 1920. We're talking about in 2020. They can do this. There could be ocular proof on that video, but yet the law enforcement officials who came out to investigate this matter, let them leave and go home and sleep in their beds at night. That's why it's so outrageous to us people in communities of color, because we know if the shoe was on the other foot and it was Ahmaud and his father Marcus in that pickup truck, and they had a shotgun and a .357 Magnum, and they chased Greg McMichael's son in broad daylight and end up killing him, they know they would have been arrested from day one, and they know they would not have been given a bond. Nobody would have had to justify anything. So why the two justice systems in America, one for black America and one for white America? We're the United States of America, and even though us black people understand the Constitution wasn't written for us, as my hero Thurgood Marshall said, we're going to make the Constitution ours anyway, because we are Americans.
I want to go to a piece that talks about shortly after the shooting, the prosecutor for the Brunswick Judicial Circuit, Jackie Johnson, recused herself because Gregory McMichael had worked in her office. The case was then sent to George Barnhill, the district attorney in Waycross, Georgia, who later recused himself from the case after Mr. Arbery's mother argued that he had a conflict because his son also works for the Brunswick district attorney. But before he relinquished the case, Barnhill wrote a letter to the Glynn County Police Department. In the letter, which was obtained by the Times, he argued there was not sufficient probable cause to arrest Arbery's pursuers. This is an astounding story. Explain the conflicts here. Again, McMichael, a retired police officer, an investigator.
Yes, ma'am, Amy. He was a police officer and an investigator for the district attorney's office and had worked for them for over 30 years. So we are very distrustful of any legal or law enforcement agencies in that southeastern part of Georgia, because we feel they all know the McMichaels, and they are going to be biased in favor of the McMichaels because of those relationships. And even the current prosecutor, we don't have trust for him because he has revealed his perspective. He had that video. He could have issued an arrest warrant based on just the video, like the Georgia Bureau of Investigations finally did when they took over the investigation, because it was probable cause in the video. You didn't have to do, I mean, it's probable cause. Black people are arrested on far less in America every day, but they actually had a video and they still said there was not enough evidence just to arrest them. And that's why we want a special prosecutor appointed, and we want to make sure that if these are individuals who currently work at the law enforcement agencies there and around Brunswick, Georgia, who failed to arrest them either because of incompetence or intentional, they should not have anything at all to do with the prosecution of this case.
Ben Crump, what forced the release of this video this week? I mean, and it comes at the same time that Georgia has lifted its lockdown, so there was immediate protest. I mean, it's clear it's the protesters and the outcry across the country that have led to this to the arrests of the McMichaels. Talk about what forced this video release. And it also was just released on a local website.
Yes, ma'am. Apparently, a lawyer or a former lawyer associated with the McMichaels, the murderous father and son duo who executed Ahmaud Arbery, released the video. And apparently he said he released it because he felt that it would somehow exonerate these killers. And it makes no sense to me. It's asinine how they feel this hunting party, this hunting posse chasing this unarmed young African-American throughout that community was something that would exonerate them. Amy, they teach us in first-year law school about malice aforethought. That is, you know, what is in the mind of the killer. And we believe when they got in that truck with all that firepower going to confront this young black man, that they had evil intent, that you can look at their intentions and conclude that they should be held liable for murder, because we know, again, if the shoe was on the other foot and it was two African-American men who got in their trucks with this kind of firepower and killed an unarmed young white man in broad daylight, that they would be charged and convicted with murder day one.
So you have, at the time of this broadcast, in a little bit, the Georgia Department of Investigation is going to hold a news conference. Then a major protest is going to be held. If you can explain what the Georgia Department of Investigation had to say. Now, the Georgia governor says there will be justice. And also, you represented Trayvon Martin's family. Trayvon Martin would have been the same age of Ahmaud if he had lived and not been killed by George Zimmerman. And again, today is Ahmaud's 26th birthday. So if you can talk about what this means, that the Georgia Department of Investigation is involved, and your comparisons.
Certainly. The similarities between Trayvon Martin and Ahmaud Arbery are eerie. Both of them were killed in the month of February. Trayvon on February 26, 2012, and Ahmaud on February 23rd, 2020. And then both of them were accused of burglary. You know, Trayvon and the gated community, and then Ahmaud and the Santina Shores community. And then both of the killers who were armed claimed that they had to kill these young unarmed black men because they were in fear of their lives. And then both of the killers, after they killed these two unarmed young black men, Trayvon and Ahmaud, they both got to go home and sleep in their beds at night. And then you had the prosecutors in Sanford, Florida, with Trayvon have an alleged conflict of interest. And then you had the prosecutors in Brunswick, Georgia, have an alleged conflict of interest. And then you didn't get an arrest for weeks in Trayvon's case. You didn't get an arrest for weeks in Ahmaud's case. In Trayvon's case, the state police, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement had to take over the investigation before there was an arrest. And in Ahmaud's case, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations had to take over the investigation before there was an arrest. And in both cases, you had objective evidence of a pursuit. And Trayvon, we had audio. We heard the pursuit and we heard the gunshot. But in Ahmaud's case, we visually see the pursuit with our own eyes, and we see the gunshots. And so it's so eerily similar. And the fact that they both would be 26 years old today had they lived tells us all we need to know, that in America, we must do better.
Ben Crump,
must do better.
What happens next as we wrap up?
We ask that there's a special prosecutor brought in, because we have great distrust in anybody working in that Southeast Georgia law enforcement community. And we want to make sure that we have a diverse jury panel, because we don't want a repeat of cases past where you have no diversity on the jury and they don't understand the culture or the common life experiences of Ahmaud Arbery.
We want to thank you so much, Ben Crump, for joining us, civil rights attorney representing the family of Ahmaud Arbery, the author of Open Season, Legalized Genocide of Colored People. He represented the family of Trayvon Martin. And, of course, we'll continue to follow this story as it unfolds. When we come back, we look at the deadly, disparate impact of the pandemic on African Americans as told through the story of Linda Villarosa, looking at the Zulu Club, a black social organization in New Orleans during and after Mardi Gras. Stay with us. I'll Fly Away by Brassaholics featuring Mecca Notes, the songs traditionally played during New Orleans funerals. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We turn now to look at the deadly, disparate impact of the pandemic on African Americans as told through an in-depth story for the New York Times Magazine about what happened to the Zulu Club, a black social organization in New Orleans during Mardi Gras. Usually the experience is a joy. The coronavirus made it a tragedy. As reporter Linda Villarosa writes, quote, when the crew of Zulu Parade rolled out onto Jackson Avenue to kick off Mardi Gras festivities on February 25th, the party started for Black New Orleans. Tens of thousands of people lined the 4.5-mile route, reveling in the animated succession of jazz musicians, high-stepping marching bands from historically black colleges and universities, and loose-limbed dancers dressed in Zulu costumes, complete with grass skirts and blackface makeup, a homage to the Zulu people of South Africa, and for some, a satirical spit in the eye to the past when Mardi Gras was put on by clubs of white men who barred black people from taking part, Villarosa writes. Linda Villarosa reports that at the same time the Mardi Gras festivities brought over 1 million visitors from around the world to New Orleans, the Trump administration was repeatedly downplaying the risk of COVID-19, even as the president was being warned by advisors about the potential of 500,000 deaths and an economic meltdown. Members of the Zulu Club paid a terrible price. A recent study shows African Americans represent 13% of the U.S. population. According, though, but counties with higher black populations account for more than half of all COVID-19 cases and almost 60% of deaths. For more, Linda Villarosa joins us. She directs the journalism program at City College of New York and contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine, where her recent cover story appeared, A Terrible Price, the Deadly Racial Disparities of COVID-19 in America. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Linda. An amazing piece. Take us back to that day where the Zulu Club gathered.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's nice to hear you and see you. Well, that was, first of all, Carnival begins in early January in New Orleans. And so there had been a whole bunch of very large-scale events and activities, parties, leading up to the Mardi Gras Day Parade on the 25th. And that was where so many people gathered along the streets. And the Zulu Club is known for throwing golden painted coconuts out, and that's the prize that people want to catch. So everyone was standing shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, almost trying to catch the coconuts and seeing standing on the sidelines, being part of the parade. So it was.
You're freezing a bit. I think you're going to come back in just 1 second. We're speaking with Linda Villarosa, who wrote this amazing New York Times Magazine cover story called A Terrible Price. Linda, are you back with us? This is the price we pay, by the way, one of the smaller prices. But in this pandemic, people are, in order to ensure and stop community spread, reporting to us from home. And we're going to turn right now back to Linda. Linda, continue to tell us your story.
So people were standing shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, trying along the parade route, as well as taking part in the parade. So it became, because it was so crowded, and it was a joyful time and a wonderful time. My daughter was there, and she was telling me about it. It became a coronavirus hothouse just because no one knew what was brewing.
So then talk about what happened. What were the warnings at the time in New Orleans? And tell us then what unfolded.
So behind the scenes at the Louisiana Department of Health and even the local Department of Health, there was worry, but they were looking to the federal government for direction. So no one at the time knew that it was bad enough to cancel the parade or cancel any of the festivities. And also, they were more worried about people bringing it in, visitors coming in, not what was actually happening. So now, looking back, we realized that coronavirus was already there. But it was just the people on the ground didn't know, especially the people from the Zulu Club who were taking direction from all the levels of government, but who were taking direction from the federal government.
And so what transpired after that? Just tell us the Zulu Club story.
So what happened was with the Zulu Club men, it's 800 mostly African-American men who are from all walks of life, and they do this club all year round. But the carnival, the Mardi Gras season, is their the height of their fun and their what they're doing, their parties and their festivals. So they were after the 25th of February, some of them started getting ill. And they were communicating with each other. It's a close-knit group. Sometimes, they were learning about each other on Facebook, who was getting ill, and also they were communicating with each other. So when I started reporting the piece in early April, 6 men had died and another 20 had been infected with COVID. And by the time I finished, 2 more had died and 30 had been infected.
So the overall number, by the time you finish this story, of people in the Zulu Club who died as a result of COVID-19, that started with them just not being told at the time of the true dangers of COVID-19 and the threat in New Orleans.
Exactly. So it was, when I started, it was 6 men had died and 20 had been infected. When I finished, 2 more had died, a total of 8, and 30 had been infected. And that's the ones that they knew about with the 30. And the organizers of the Zulu Club think it's more.
And so then, Linda Villarosa, talk about the messages of the Trump administration, what the president says matters. At the time when all of this started, he was in India poo-pooing what was happening in the United States, saying it wasn't a problem. But if you could then talk about the racial disparities. This is an issue you focus on in so many cases. The last time we had you on, it was the racial disparities in the death of women who give birth and the problem with African-American women who die in childbirth or after childbirth. But if you can talk about this issue that has become so significant in this country now in the pandemic.
So even as the federal government was downplaying COVID, behind the scenes, there were organizations, including the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the NAACP, different lawyers groups and even politicians were knowing that these racial disparities that exist in the United States that make Black people more vulnerable to serious illnesses and other people of color existed and were going to intersect with COVID in the worst kind of way. And so Black people are more likely to have the kinds of underlying conditions that make COVID more serious. And that just is a fact. And so when COVID came, it was what some people have called the perfect storm of terribleness, with people already with underlying conditions being hit with this really serious, confusing virus.
And can you talk about the distrust that African Americans have of the healthcare system and the historical context for that?
So we've known for, centuries, decades, years that Black people and other people of color are treated unfairly in our current medical system. And how I think of it is I don't think doctors and other healthcare providers go into medicine in order to do harm, but it happens because of mostly unconscious bias. And so it's been very well documented that Black people and other people of color, but specifically Black people, have unfair treatment, whether it's in pain management, whether it's in the emergency room, it's when getting C-sections, during birth, it's all kinds of different treatments where Black people just aren't treated well. So if there's a distrust, among Black people of the healthcare system, it's real and it's evidence-based that there is a problem, that people should be distrustful.
Speaking of history, I wanted to go to Nicole Hannah-Jones, who just won a Pulitzer Prize for her lead essay for the New York Times 1619 Project. She spoke to MTV last month about the racial disparities in COVID-related deaths.
What we're starting to see as we learn that Black people are disproportionately dying from this is this blaming of Black communities and saying that, well, that's just because Black people don't take care of themselves. Black people don't take care of their health. The truth is that Black people are living in a constructed environment that is designed to actually produce exactly the disparities that we see. It is not accidental that Black people are the most likely to live near toxic sites, the most likely to live in polluted neighborhoods, the most likely to live in areas where there's a lot of highway and freeway traffic. And so what that means is Black people have been intentionally placed in the most vulnerable positions.
That was Nicole Hannah-Jones. Linda Villarosa, you were a contributor to the acclaimed 1619 Project with an essay titled Myths About Physical Racial Differences Were Used to Justify Slavery and Are Still Believed by Doctors Today. As we wrap up, if you could comment on the significance of the 1619 Project that you were a part of, and also not only the Pulitzer going to Nicole Hannah-Jones, but to Ida B. Wells as well, in a special citation and award for her outstanding and courageous reporting on the horrific and vicious violence against African Americans during the era of lynching. If you can take us full circle.
Well, first of all, we are so proud of Nicole, and I was honored to be part of that project. And I think that it speaks to the power of Black women journalists, Nicole and Ida B. Wells, and I'm really proud to be a part of that group. I think that what 1619 did, the project, was take us back and look at the legacy of enslavement. And, there's always people saying, oh, slavery was so long ago. That's not part of our experience. But it is. And our charge was to prove that what happened during enslavement still lingers today.
Linda Villarosa, I want to thank you for being with us. She directs the journalism program at City College of New York, contributing writer for the New York Times. We're going to link to your piece, that cover story of the New York Times Magazine, A Terrible Price, the Deadly Racial Disparities of COVID-19 in America. And we'll also link to the 1619 Project. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, Dr. Lena Wen joins us, the former health commissioner of Baltimore, an emergency room doctor who just gave birth. She'll talk about, well, while President Trump gets tested every day at the White House, he downplays the need for regular testing throughout the country. Stay with us.
No puede ser de tal manera. Tú lo quieres tú tener y siempre quieres más.
Mio by the Puerto Rican band Buscabulla. The song is about the corporations that use the island as an unsustainable tax haven. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As more than 40 states begin to reopen their economies, many continue to face a severe shortage of tests. Meanwhile, President Trump gets tested every day at the White House, yet downplays the importance of tests for the rest of the country. We're joined now by Dr. Lena Wen. She's an emergency room physician, public health professor at George Washington University, previously served as Baltimore's health commissioner. Her recent piece in the Washington Post is headlined, "As States Reopen, Here's How You Protect Yourself from the Coming Surge." Dr. Wen, it's great to have you back with us. I want to talk about, and congratulations on giving birth. You just gave birth. But I want to ask you first about this issue. President Trump's valet just tested positive for COVID. He apparently went ballistic, yelling at his staff about him not being protected. A lot of people in this country feel that way. And the solution has been he's being tested every day at the White House. Yet most people in this country have nothing like that access, not even to the first test. Can you talk about why testing is so important, especially as the country reopens?
Well, first of all, I wish that the valet recovers and is in good health. As a physician, that's always my first concern, is about the health of people who are ill. You're right, Amy. I mean, widespread testing is so critical. You need to have widespread testing because that is what we need in order to find out if somebody who has symptoms actually has COVID-19. And we also have to know not only for those who have symptoms, but also for asymptomatic people, because we know that there is a high rate of transmission among people who do not have any symptoms at all. We need that testing for the clinical reason of helping to guide clinical decisions and also to guide public health decisions to understand what is the true rate of COVID-19 in communities. Estimates are that we need millions of tests, on the orders of 5 to even 20 million tests a day to be performed in order to help the country get back to normal and get back to reopening. That's actually why I'm so concerned about reopening now, because we don't have nearly the capacity to do all of these tests. And you can see, I think, through the president's own example of why that testing is so important. It provides reassurance to the president. Why shouldn't this testing be available to all Americans to give everyone the reassurance that we need to safely return to work and to school?
So you wrote this piece, 7 things the administration is getting wrong about testing. The White House press secretary, Trump continually saying, what do you want us to test everyone every hour of every day? This is ridiculous. Then we immediately hear that President Trump, Vice President Pence are being tested every day. What are these 7 things?
Yeah, so I've been listening, I think, as a lot of people have, to the White House coronavirus task force briefings. Now, I don't know how often they'll occur, but I was listening to them frequently. And during every briefing, it was always mentioned that governors, doctors, hospitals are bringing up the issue of insufficient tests. And then one after the other, we would hear the administration give these justifications for why we don't need more tests. They'll say, well, we don't have the perfect test. We need better testing. Well, perfect cannot be the enemy of the good. No test is perfect. We need more. We just need these tests to be out there. Another justification is, well, we just can't get enough tests. Well, that's what the federal government is for. We as America, we do not say we can't get it done. Actually, we should be doing this backwards and saying, what do we need in order to reopen this country safely? And if it requires 5 million, 20 million tests a day, then the next question should be, what can we do as a country to get there? What is the national effort directed by the federal government that's needed in order for us to get there? It cannot simply be one reason.
Wouldn't this be the invoking of the War Production Act? I mean, President Trump just went to Arizona to a Honeywell plant that's now making masks. Of course, he went unmasked in the plant, despite the fact that there were signs saying you should wear a mask. And interestingly, the music that was playing over him was Live and Let Die. But if you can talk about what that would mean, just gearing up plants to not only make masks, but make tests.
Yes, and not only masks and tests, but really the entire gamut of what we're going to be needing in this pandemic. This is not a one-time effort. We're not looking at something that's done in the next month. We're looking at many months, many years of needing many more supplies. I mean, unfortunately, we have left our healthcare workers without the proper protection. It's a travesty that we have let healthcare workers go without masks and gowns and other things that they need to protect themselves when we could see that shortage coming. We should also never leave our patients in a position where they might have to fight for a ventilator, where healthcare workers have to decide who gets that last ventilator. We know that that is an issue that we could be facing. And then there are issues later on down the line, too. We always talk about a vaccine as the solution. Well, vaccines are not the solution. Vaccinations are. What happens if we don't have enough syringes or vials or rubber stoppers? I mean, that's what I fear. If we cannot even get enough tests and swabs, what's going to happen when we look down the line and to see what do we need to produce millions, maybe billions of doses of vaccines in large numbers? We should be anticipating these needs now, not waiting until it's too late. And that is the role of the federal government. You're right, to kick in the Defense Production Act, but actually to act like a federal government should in coordinating these national efforts instead of letting individual states and hospitals and doctors defend for themselves.
So you have this situation, Dr. Wen. The White House is ending its daily medical briefings. It's rejecting the CDC guidelines as the countries reopen. It's a 17-page memo that says what states should do if they're going to reopen. And they have forbidden the top doc on the coronavirus task force, Dr. Fauci, from testifying before the House. The CDC issue of not allowing this report to see the light of day. Talk about the significance of this.
I wish that we had briefings every single day by our medical experts in the federal government, who are some of the best doctors and scientists in the world. I mean, the rest of the world looks to these leaders to give sound public health guidance. I know that I do as a clinician, and clinicians all around the country do. As a former local public health official, I also depended on the CDC to put out guidance that would help me in my jurisdiction to assist in restaurants and schools. And I mean, there's so much that's happening around COVID-19. We need this expert body to synthesize all the research that's out there to help us with practical guidance for how to do things safely to reduce risk for everyone. And frankly, the American people need that information as well. So I wish that there were these daily briefings done by these expert doctors and scientists where they talked about the state of COVID-19, what's happening around the country, what's the latest research, how can businesses stay safe, how can individuals reduce our risk. That's what I would be turning to the CDC for. And when we ignore science, we pay a price. And unfortunately, in this case, the price is going to be lives.
And the issue of masks, the importance of them. I want to go to this moment. We're just going to play the first seconds of it. President Trump was quite surprised by this testy exchange during an Oval Office meeting with medical workers marking National Nurses Day. Sophia Adams, president of the American Association of Nurse Practitioners, told President Trump she'd been forced to use a single N95 mask for weeks due to a shortage of personal protective equipment at her New Orleans hospital.
So PPE has been sporadic, but it's been manageable, and we do what we have to do. We're nurses, and we learn to adapt and do whatever the best thing that we can do for our patients to get the job done and get the care provided.
Sporadic for you, but not sporadic for a lot of other people.
Oh, no, I agree, Mr. President.
Because I've heard
so
the
there's
opposite.
President Trump saying he heard the opposite, as scores of nurses and doctors have died during this pandemic. But I also wanted to go to Dr. Wen, people wearing masks and children. You have a toddler, a 2.5-year-old, and you have your newborn. And you just participated in a children's teach-in on CNN with Sesame Street. If you could talk about children, should children wear masks outside? And what should parents tell their children about who they're protecting when they wear those masks?
That's an important point about why it is that we're wearing masks. And look, the guidance around masks has changed since the beginning of this pandemic, which is normal because as you find out more information about a new virus, the guidance should be changing. Initially, we're saying no masks, and now we're saying wear a mask. And the reason is that we wear a mask not to protect ourselves from other people, but to protect others from us in case we are carriers of COVID-19 and just don't realize it. And so it is actually a courtesy to everyone else that we're wearing a mask. And therefore, if we all wear masks, then we'll all be protecting each other, and we're in this together.
Dr. Wen, I'm going very quickly because we have so much to cover with you. One is Kawasaki disease, what we are now learning children are facing during this pandemic.
Children still are less likely to have severe illness than adults, but we are finding in both children and adults that there are these unexpected symptoms. This is a respiratory disease, but it also seems to be causing problems, inflammations of our blood vessels or clots in our blood vessels. And so that's what we're seeing in children and also even in young, healthy adults. We're seeing young, healthy adults be afflicted with strokes that might leave them debilitated for life because of COVID-19. And so this is really a serious disease that we need to be protecting ourselves against. And I just want to say, even as states are reopening, that does not mean that you should loosen your own social distancing restrictions. Stay home if you can, because social distancing is a privilege that not everyone has.
And then if you could talk about giving birth in the time of the pandemic. We spoke to you just days before, maybe it was a week before you gave birth. It was astounding to see you on the networks. I mean, when was the last time you went on TV right before you gave birth? And then when did you go back on, what, the day after?
Not the day after, but a few days after. I mean, we are all doing our part, and this is what I could do to help provide information and during this pandemic.
And so tell us what it was like to go to the hospital during this pandemic to have your infant.
Very different from the last time that I gave birth in the same hospital 2.5 years ago. I mean, the guidelines were constantly changing, and so I wasn't even sure that I could bring my husband with me during labor and delivery. I could at the end, but it still just means that this is a time of uncertainty. And healthcare continues to happen. So I would advise for everyone, no matter if you're pregnant, a person, or if you have any other medical condition, to have a list of your medications, your medical conditions, your emergency contacts with you at all times, because you may not be able to have your advocate with you if you need to go into the hospital. Make plans, but also know that the plans could be changing as this is a time of uncertainty. And I think it's also a time that we have to grant each other a lot of grace as we're all going through this period together.
Finally, Dr. Wen, your words of advice as the country opens, what you think is the most important thing for people to do.
Frankly, we are not ready for a safe reopening. We have not met the White House's own criteria. None of the states that are reopening have met the White House's own criteria. So reduce your own risk, wash your hands, stay social distancing as much as you can. If you have to go back to work, ask your employer about what their protocols are to keep you safe. Also, do your part to reduce the risk for others. Do not plan gatherings. This is not the time to plan play dates and dinner parties. It is not safe to do that. And so reduce your risk and know that in keeping yourself safe, you're also reducing the risk for others around you as well. Stay away from people.
Go ahead.
Just stay safe and stay well. Know that we can all do our part.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leana Wen, emergency room physician, public health professor at George Washington University, former Baltimore health commissioner. We'll link to her Washington Post pieces, the latest. As states reopen, here's how you protect yourself from the coming surge. As we wrap up the show, I wanted to send good wishes out to a woman who's changed everything. A very happy, meaningful, landmark birthday to Naomi Klein. Happy birthday, Naomi. Democracy Now! Is working with as few people as possible on site. The majority of our amazing team is working from home. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.